We left off last time talking about, excuse me, valid inferences, good logic between premises and conclusions, and we were talking about cases where there were these what we call categorical propositions, or, instances of predicate logic inferences that were good, and we learned some that were good and some that were bad. Now, logic, certainly sometimes the categories that things are put into, or based on the quantifiers. I hope you remember words like all, most, some are quantifiers. They tell us about quantities, how many things there are. Sometimes it's those words that make the logic of the statement. And that's in predicate logic. Sometimes it's whole sentences and complex whole sentences that are built from smaller ones that make the logic work, and sometimes make the logic not work. And what we want to do is turn our attention now to these kinds of inferences. And here's what we call, in this case, we call these kind of inferences, or the study of these kinds of inferences or arguments, propositional logic, or another way of putting it is sentential logic, the logic of sentences. The idea is, and we'll see some examples at, and in fact, let's pull up the first example so we'll see what we're talking about. Either the National League or the American League wins. The idea is there are two sentences here. The American League wins. One sentence, the National League wins, and we sometimes say that expresses a proposition. That is, we have to be a little bit more definite. That is, we say the American League won, and we're talking about the All-Star game in a particular, the baseball All-Star game, in a particular year. And those are sometimes we like to say that those are propositions, that sentences express propositions without getting into the philosophical controversy. This kind of logic is called propositional or sentential logic, and let's take a look at our first example. Either the American or the National League wins. Since the National League did not win, the American League did. Sounds like a valid argument, and I'm going to claim that it has something to do with propositional or sentential logic. Let's look at another example. Jones is at Kingsborough. If Jones is at Kingsborough, then she is in Brooklyn. Therefore, Jones is in Brooklyn. Okay, again, sentences. Jones at Kingsborough, Jones in Brooklyn. And then we have, in this case, last time it was an either or, now we have an if-then that seems to be doing the logical work. And again, I think if we look at number 2, looks like a good inference, looks like a good argument. Maybe a boring one, but another one. Now here's one that might make some people a little bit more concerned. If Smith studies, then she passes the course. If she passes the course, then she graduates. Thus, if she studies, she graduates. If you were Smith, be a significant argument for you, something that you should take pretty seriously. Again, has something to do with whole sentences built with if-thens. That's what makes the logic. I mean, we all see this is really a good argument, and what makes it compelling is the fact that it's the form of argument. That is, that it's a valid argument, and that's determined by the logical form. And in this case, logical form being made up of entire sentences connected with certain kinds of logical words like if, then, or either, or. Now let's take a look quickly at what I'm going to call the propositional or the sentential connectives. That is how we connect two different sentences logically. And the first one we looked at is sometimes called disjunctive, either or. Think of it, P a whole sentence, Q a whole sentence, P or Q, the disjunction of P or Q. In other words, if we say something like that, one of those two has to be true. Another logical connective is, and let me take it one at a time. They pop up a little bit faster sometimes than I like. Conjunction, that is and, P and Q. You know, the sun is shining and I go to the park. The two of them, the two sentences are both true. In the case of disjunction, it means at least one of the two, P or Q, is true. Here, conjunction, both P and Q are true. Next one, which maybe is where I should have started, because that even played a factor in predicate logic. Not. That is, it's negation. P, the sun is shining, the sun is not shining. It's not the case that the sun is shining. That's the negation. So that one is true when the proposition is in fact false. And then we have one that we saw a bunch of things that we call a conditional, sometimes hypothetical, and sometimes, remember, we call the other ones categorical syllogisms. Sometimes here we talk about hypothetical syllogisms, although we're going to reserve that term for one particular inference, which is if P is true, then Q is true. And we're going to look at a couple of arguments using that, and a couple of inferences using that kind of connective, the if-then. Another way of saying that, by the way, is P only if Q. And then you might call something its equivalence or a biconditional. That is, it's the if-then going in both directions. P if and only if Q. Sometimes you say P just in case Q. You know, that is, if one's true, the other one's true. If the other one's true, the first. If P is Q, if P is true, Q is true, and if Q is true, P is true. Oh. P if Q and P only if. That is, we see that the biconditional is made up of a conditional going in both directions. Couple of different ways of saying P if Q and P only if Q, or if Q then P and if P then Q. So those are our major logical connectives that we're going to be looking at in propositional logic.